The chandeliers threw soft gold light across 200 faces, and every one of them was turned toward the small stage where Vanessa Cole stood with a microphone in her hand and a champagne flute raised high. Eleanor Whitfield sat near the front, spine straight, hands folded in her lap the way she had been taught to sit through 30 years of formal dinners and change of command ceremonies. She was smiling. She was always smiling. "To Robert's mother," Vanessa said, her voice bright and warm and carrying easily over the crowd, "who has been a little unstable these days, bless her heart. We're just so glad she could make it tonight." Laughter rippled through the tables closest to the Cole family. Quick, easy laughter, the kind that assumes everyone is in on the joke. Somewhere behind her, Eleanor heard Gerald Cole's booming chuckle rise above the rest. Her hand did not move from the linen napkin folded neatly beside her plate. Her expression did not change. 35 years of military discipline had taught her exactly how to hold a room's gaze without giving it anything back. She smiled. She always smiled. But what almost no one in that ballroom knew was what she brought with her, tucked inside a plain manila folder resting quietly on the chair beside her, or who was about to stand up because of it. Have you ever sat quietly in a room while someone rewrote your own story right in front of you? Smiling the whole time because that's what you'd always done? Eleanor knew that feeling better than most. If you've ever been the one who gave everything and got written out anyway, you already understand what's coming next. If stories like this speak to you, women who get underestimated, dismissed, even mocked and come back not with revenge but with proof, stay a while and consider subscribing. This channel is built for you. Now, to understand what Eleanor was really holding in that folder, and why one man was about to rise from his seat because of it, we have to go back 15 years, to the day everything her family now takes for granted quietly began. Eleanor had married young, into a life she never quite chose but never once regretted. The constant moving, the long deployments, the quiet discipline of building a home in 6 different states before she turned 40. Robert was a colonel, steady and devoted, and for 20 years their marriage ran on the same rhythm as his career. Structured, dependable, built on trust rather than romance's louder gestures. Then, 15 years ago, that rhythm stopped. Robert died in service and Eleanor became a widow at 48. Standing at a graveside with a 20-year-old son beside her and a folded flag in her hands. She did not fall apart. She finished out her own military career alone, rising to the rank of major before she retired. A woman who had spent her entire adult life inside chains of command, understanding better than most that composure was not the absence of feeling, but the discipline of not performing it. Civilian life gave her a modest pension and a son to raise by herself. She took a job as a bookkeeper for a small veterans charity, and there, colleagues learned quickly what her family already knew. Eleanor Whitfield never let a number go unaccounted for. Not a receipt, not a transfer, not a cent. She was not a woman who raised her voice. She did not perform grief or pride or anger. She simply kept records of the household, of her son's milestones, and quietly, of the old friendships forged during Robert's years of service, connections she rarely mentioned but never let fade entirely. Those ties would matter more than she could have imagined, though she had no reason yet to think of them at all. 8 years ago, Daniel called his mother late one night, his voice tight with the particular exhaustion of a graduate student, watching his savings run dry a full year before his degree. Eleanor didn't lecture him. She didn't ask what he'd done wrong. She simply transferred $18,000 into his account the next morning, and told him to focus on finishing what he'd started. When he tried to thank her, she brushed it off with a single line. "That's what mothers do. Now go study." 3 years ago it happened again, quieter still. Daniel and Vanessa weren't even engaged yet, just a young couple wanting a home of their own before the wedding conversation had fully begun. Eleanor gave them $45,000 toward the down payment, and when Daniel offered to tell Vanessa's parents where the money had come from, Eleanor stopped him. She didn't want it announced. She didn't want it to feel like control or leverage or a debt hanging over anyone's head. It was simply help given and forgotten. 6 months ago came the venue deposit, $12,500, wired the same week Vanessa fell in love with a ballroom neither she nor Daniel could yet afford. Across town, the Cole family operated on an entirely different rhythm. At every dinner, Gerald Cole found a way to remind the table of his own generosity. A story about covering the caterer, a comment about taking care of things, delivered loudly enough that no one at the table could miss it. Eleanor gave nothing loudly. She had spent a lifetime believing that quiet generosity was the only kind worth offering. She had no idea that her silence was about to be mistaken by nearly everyone in that family for absence. It started small enough that Eleanor barely noticed at first. There was the cake-tasting Vanessa forgot to mention until it had already happened, followed by an easy apology and a photo sent 2 days later, as if that closed the matter. There was the dinner where Gerald leaned back in his chair, gesturing toward Eleanor with his wine glass, and joked to the table that she probably budgeted her groceries around her little military pension, laughter following, Eleanor's own smile following a half-second behind it, the way it always did. Then came the invoice. Eleanor had noticed the venue's final numbers didn't match the deposit she remembered wiring, and she asked Vanessa about it gently, the way she asked about everything, precisely, without accusation. Vanessa waved a hand and told her not to worry about it, that these things happened, and added almost sweetly that Eleanor's memory had been getting a little foggy lately, bless her. Eleanor said nothing. She simply made a note to check the figures herself later, the same way she checked every figure that ever crossed her desk. None of these moments on their own meant anything. A missed invitation, a joke about a pension, a comment about memory. Any one of them could be brushed off, forgiven, forgotten by morning. She let each comment go, the way she'd let go of 1,000 small slights over a lifetime of choosing peace over friction. She had no idea they were quietly building toward a single sentence, one that would be spoken into a microphone, in front of 140 guests, before the night was through. On a quiet Tuesday evening, Eleanor sat down at her kitchen table with the venue's final invoice, a cup of tea, and the same habit she'd carried since her very first bookkeeping job, the simple need to see every number line up before she could rest. It wasn't suspicion that drove her. It was routine. But the routine turned up something she hadn't expected. Buried in the wedding account's transaction history was a transfer she didn't recognize, $30,000, moved out 4 months earlier, routed directly into an account belonging to Cole Hardware and Supply, Gerald's business. Eleanor sat very still for a long moment, turning the number over the way she'd once turned over discrepancies in military supply ledgers, back when a missing figure could mean something far more serious than an awkward family conversation. She kept reading. Buried further down in a message thread Daniel had never mentioned to her was the reason the wedding budget had still balanced despite the missing $30,000. Daniel had quietly borrowed against his own signing bonus to cover the gap, telling no one, not wanting to worry his mother during what was supposed to be a joyful season. And then in a separate folder on the shared wedding planning drive, she found the toast script, drafted weeks ago, ready for the reception, already crediting the Cole family's generosity for making the wedding possible. Her name appeared nowhere in it. Eleanor closed the laptop slowly. She didn't call anyone. She didn't confront anyone. She didn't send an angry text or demand an explanation over the phone. She did what she'd done for 30 years in uniform, in situations far more consequential than this one. She made a copy of everything. Eleanor spread the documents across her kitchen table the way she once spread supply manifests across a desk in uniform, methodical, unhurried, every page in its place. $18,000 for tuition, $45,000 for the down payment, $12,500 for the venue, $75,500, given freely over 8 years without a single condition attached, and $30,000, diverted without her knowledge, while a toast was being written to thank someone else entirely. But the numbers were never really the point, and Eleanor knew that better than anyone. The real cost was quieter than any figure on a bank statement, being written out of her own son's story, being called unstable by people who had, in part, been living on her generosity for years. She did not sit there planning what she would say, or how she might embarrass anyone, or what satisfaction revenge might bring. That had never been her way. She simply organized bank transfers, tuition receipts, and near the bottom of the folder, copies of Robert's service commendations, records she had once filed years ago with the help of his old commanding officer. Weeks earlier, before any of this had surfaced, she'd quietly invited that same man to the wedding herself, not to expose anyone, not even imagining she'd need to. She'd invited him because Robert would have wanted his old commander there, honoring a son he'd never gotten to see grow up. She had no idea, not yet, just how much that quiet invitation was about to matter. The laughter faded slowly around the tables near the Cole family, Glasses lowering, the moment already moving on the way careless moments always do. Vanessa smiled and lifted her champagne higher, ready to move into the next line of her toast. Then a chair scraped softly against the floor near the back of the ballroom. Major General Harlan Voss rose to his feet, unhurried, the same way he'd once risen in briefing rooms decades earlier. Not for attention, but because something needed to be said, and he was the one positioned to say it. Heads turned. The room quieted the way rooms instinctively do for a man who carries himself like that. "I served with Robert Whitfield for 11 years, he said, his voice calm and even, carrying easily without needing volume. "I watched that man build a career out of discipline and quiet competence. And for the 15 years since he's been gone, I've watched his wife do exactly the same thing. Raise their son, hold this family together, and never once ask for credit." He paused, letting the words settle. "I also happen to know something about people who get called unstable," he continued, a faint, knowing warmth in his tone. "In my experience, they're usually the ones who keep receipts." A ripple of uncertain laughter tried to rise and immediately died. "So I'll ask a simple question," Voss said, turning slightly toward the room. "Does anyone here actually know who paid for this venue? Who covered the down payment on that young couple's house? Who paid for a degree that made tonight's toast possible at all?" Silence spread across the ballroom like something physical. Eleanor sat perfectly still, hands folded, the manila folder resting quietly on the chair beside her. No longer just a folder, but the only thing in the room that could answer his question. The silence held for a moment longer, then broke into something sharper. Heads turning toward Eleanor, then toward Gerald, then back again, 140 guests suddenly recalculating everything they thought they'd understood about the evening. Daniel stood slowly, his face pale beneath the chandelier light. "Mom," he said quietly. "What is he talking about?" Eleanor didn't raise her voice. She didn't stand, didn't perform, didn't reach for drama the way the moment seemed to invite. She simply lifted the manila folder from the chair beside her and held it out to her son. Inside were the tuition receipts from 8 years ago, the wire transfer for the down payment 3 years past, the venue deposit from 6 months earlier. And beneath all of it, the transaction Eleanor herself had only discovered days before, $30,000, moved quietly from the wedding account into Gerald Cole's business, 4 months ago, without her knowledge or consent. Daniel read in silence, his hands beginning to tremble slightly around the pages. Across the room, Gerald tried to laugh it off first. "A business loan," he said, "temporary. He'd always planned to pay it back." But the excuse thinned with every word, and the guests at his own table had stopped smiling entirely. Vanessa said nothing at all. The joke she'd made minutes earlier, the one that had drawn easy laughter from people who hadn't known any better, now sat in the room like something no one wanted to touch. Someone asked Eleanor gently if the dates on the transfer were accurate. "Yes," she said. Just that. One quiet word, offered without triumph, without anger, simply the truth, confirmed the way she'd confirmed 1,000 figures before it. There was no scene at the reception beyond that, no shouting, no dramatic exit. The band eventually played again, and the evening finished the way evenings do, quieter than it had begun. Days later, Daniel came to his mother's house alone. He didn't bring excuses. He sat across from her at the same kitchen table where she'd once tallied every dollar she'd given him, and he apologized, plainly, without performance, the way she had always taught him to speak. He repaid what he could in the weeks that followed, and he and Vanessa restructured their finances without any further involvement from Gerald. Eleanor never demanded an apology from Vanessa, never asked for groveling or ceremony. She simply began showing up to family dinners again, invited properly this time, treated as exactly what she was rather than what she'd been mistaken for. Her relationship with Vanessa settled into something cool but workable. Not warmth, not friendship, but a quiet mutual respect built on facts rather than feelings. Gerald's financial ties to the family ended quietly, without announcement. Eleanor didn't win anything, not in the way triumph usually looks. She simply stopped being invisible at her own family's table, which for a woman who had never asked for much was enough. Eleanor never raised her voice that night. She never needed to. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one holding every receipt, and being underestimated has never once meant being wrong. That's the thing about people like Eleanor. They don't ask for credit. They don't perform their generosity at the dinner table, and they don't demand gratitude for what they've quietly given. But when the moment finally comes to set the record straight, they don't need to raise their voice either. The facts have always been enough. So we'll leave you with this question. Have you ever been called too much, or unstable, or dramatic by someone who was quietly living off your generosity the whole time? What happened and how did you finally set the record straight? Tell us in the comments below. We read every single one.